For 10 years, I believed I was building a future. Every morning, I woke before dawn to prepare for work. Every evening, I came home to cook dinner and pay bills. Every dollar I tucked away into savings felt like a brick in the foundation of the life my husband and I had promised each other. A house of our own, children one day, security for the struggles that might come. And in those 10 years, I gave up promotions, turned down opportunities, and told myself that my sacrifices were worth it because they were for us. Not for me alone, but for us. A team, a family, or so I thought. I was the steady one. The one who balanced the checkbook, who made sure rent was on time, who packed lunches while he pursued big dreams that always seemed to start and then stall. The business ventures that fizzled, the career changes that ended abruptly, the endless phases of self-discovery he claimed he needed. And I told myself that one day, when he finally found his footing, we would look back on these years with pride. Proof that we had endured together. But that story, I told myself, shattered on a gray Thursday evening when I logged into our joint account to schedule the monthly payment for our car loan. A routine task I had done countless times, and instead of the reassuring balance I expected, I saw a number so small it made my stomach drop. I blinked, refreshed the page, thinking there must be a mistake. But there it was, stark and undeniable, nearly everything gone. Drained in 2 large withdrawals made just days apart. I scrolled through the history with shaking hands, tracing the amounts, the dates, the names of accounts I didn't recognize. And in that moment, a cold clarity began to seep into me. This wasn't a bank error. This wasn't an oversight. This was deliberate. Someone had taken what we had spent 10 years building. And the only person with access besides me was him. I sat frozen at the kitchen table, staring at the glowing screen while the refrigerator hummed in the silence. Replaying every late night he had come home claiming to be stuck at work. Every vague explanation about where he had been. Every excuse about why money seemed tighter than it should. And suddenly, all those small doubts I had silenced over the years roared back to life. Demanding attention, I remembered the new watch he said was a gift from a client. The hotel receipt I once found crumpled in his pocket that he insisted was from a business trip. The frequent mentions of a colleague named Sarah that seemed too casual to hide the fondness in his tone, and my chest tightened as the pieces clicked together. Not randomly, but with precision, like a puzzle I had been refusing to assemble. Until now, when the picture was undeniable. My husband had not only betrayed me emotionally, but financially. He had taken our savings, my sacrifices, my years of self-denial, and given them to someone else, someone who wasn't me. The front door opened then, and he walked in whistling, tossing his keys onto the counter, kissing my cheek lightly before heading toward the fridge. And I sat there motionless, my laptop still open, my face pale, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it, but he didn't notice. He never noticed. He cracked open a beer and launched into a story about how exhausting his day had been, how his boss didn't appreciate him, how he was thinking about maybe taking a weekend trip to clear his head. And I stared at him, at the man I had loved for a decade, wondering how long he had been lying to me, how long he had been rehearsing these little speeches while emptying our life into someone else's hands. And I realized I couldn't even find the words to ask him. Not yet. Not when the betrayal was still raw and unprocessed. I needed to know more. I needed proof beyond the cold numbers on a bank screen. Because a part of me, the part that still clung to the hope of us, wanted desperately to believe there was some other explanation, some reason that wouldn't tear my world apart. But deep down I knew, I had always known. And now the evidence was staring me in the face. That night, after he fell asleep snoring beside me as if nothing were wrong, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of memories, sacrifices, and questions with no answers. And in the darkness I made a quiet vow to myself. I would find the truth, no matter how much it hurt, because I deserved to know what kind of life I had really been living. I deserved to know who the man beside me truly was. And I deserved to decide for myself whether my 10 years of sacrifice had been wasted, or whether they would become the foundation for something stronger, not with him, but for me alone. The next morning I woke before dawn as I always did, but instead of making coffee and preparing his lunch like I had done for years, I quietly slipped out of bed, grabbed my laptop, and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. Determined to start piecing together the truth, the bank account was only the beginning. And if I had learned anything in 10 years of keeping our lives organized, it was how to follow paper trails. I logged back into the account, cross-checked the withdrawals, noted the exact times and the destinations. One of them was an online transfer to a personal checking account under a name I didn't recognize. The other was a cashier's check issued directly. I printed every page, highlighting the amounts and dates, then moved on to our credit card statements, a task I usually handled automatically each month, but this time with new eyes. I saw the charges differently, restaurants I had never been to, hotel stays in cities where he had no reason to travel, boutique purchases at high-end stores he had never bought from me. My heart clenched each time I recognized the pattern. Gifts, dinners, nights away, not for me but for someone else. The mistress whose shadow I had been sensing for months, Sarah, the name he dropped so casually. Too casually, I searched my memory for details. The way his eyes lit up when he mentioned her. How defensive he became the one time I jokingly asked if she was pretty, and now it all aligned too neatly. Every receipt, every unexplained absence, every sudden mood swing when I asked too many questions. He had been building a second life while I was holding up the first one, but I couldn't just accuse him without more. I knew how easily he could twist the truth. He had always been charming, always ready with an excuse, a way of making me doubt myself, so I decided to play along. To keep my discoveries quiet while I dug deeper, I would be patient. I would gather evidence until the story was undeniable even to him, even to me. No more self-deception. No more silencing the voice in my head that whispered he wasn't who he pretended to be. Over the next days, I became an actress in my own marriage, smiling, cooking, nodding at his stories, while secretly documenting every inconsistency, every late-night work call he took in the garage, every receipt I found in his pockets, every unexplained expense. I began to build a folder hidden inside my design software on my laptop, disguised as client files, but inside it was a growing collection of screenshots, scanned bills and notes about his behavior. I even reached out quietly to Leah, my oldest friend, under the pretense of needing her help with a project, and after a glass of wine, I told her everything. She listened without interruption, her eyes wide, and then said the words I hadn't been ready to hear. "You know this isn't just betrayal, it's theft, Jade. He stole from you, from your future. He didn't just cheat. He erased the life you were building." And something about her saying it aloud gave me both validation and strength. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't overreacting. I was being deceived and robbed. One night, while he was in the shower, I picked up his phone. My hands trembling, but my resolve steady. He had always been protective of it, password locked and glued to his side. But months ago, he had once used the same passcode for our shared streaming account, and I had memorized it. A long shot, but when I entered it, the phone unlocked, and there it was. The world he thought I would never see. Messages to Sarah, dozens of them, threads stretching back months, filled with endearments, inside jokes, plans, and worst of all, promises. He told her she was the reason he felt alive, that she was worth everything, that he was finally ready to start a new life with her. I scrolled in disbelief as he described draining the account, telling her he had finally gotten the money together for their future, the very money I had skipped vacations. Overtime pay and luxuries to save was now their ticket to freedom. I read one message that made me physically ill. "Don't worry, Jade will never know. She thinks we're still struggling to make ends meet. She's so good at holding things together, she won't even notice what's missing until it's too late." My chest ached, as if the words themselves had cut me. This wasn't just betrayal, this was mockery. He had laughed at my trust, counted on my loyalty, used my sacrifices as camouflage for his lies. I copied every message, emailed them to a private account, backed them up on a drive, and then, careful not to leave a trace, I set the phone exactly where he had left it, forcing myself to breathe normally as he emerged from the shower and kissed my cheek, water still dripping from his hair, oblivious to the fact that the walls of his lies were closing in. Over the next week, I continued gathering, even going so far as to follow him one Saturday when he claimed he needed to help a friend move. I trailed his car at a distance, my heart pounding with every turn, until he pulled into the parking lot of a hotel, the kind with discreet entrances and tinted windows, and I watched as Sarah stepped out of her car, smiling, her hand slipping into his as they walked inside. The image seared itself into my brain, burning away the last fragments of denial. And yet, instead of confronting him right there, instead of exploding with the fury bubbling inside me, I forced myself to stay still, to drive away. Because anger alone would not protect me. Not legally, not financially. I needed to be smarter. I needed to let him think he was still winning until I had positioned myself to walk away with more than just broken trust. I wanted justice, not just revenge. That night I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection, wondering how I had become this woman, a detective in her own marriage, someone documenting lies instead of living truth. And yet beneath the exhaustion and the heartbreak, I saw something else in my eyes. Resolve, strength, the quiet power of someone who has finally decided she deserves better. And I whispered to myself in the mirror, this isn't the end of me. This is the beginning of the truth. By the time the second week had passed since I discovered everything, I had gathered enough evidence to fill a binder, yet I told no one except Leah. And even she urged me daily to confront him, but I knew better. I knew if I exploded too soon he would twist my words, gaslight me, cry and beg. Then quietly regroup with Sarah and find another way to cover his tracks. But if I played this carefully, if I waited until the right moment, I could not only free myself but ensure he would never be able to use me again. So I began quietly preparing for the life after him. I opened a separate bank account in my name only, moved a small amount of freelance income I had hidden away into it, and applied for a credit card under my own information, something I hadn't done in years because he always insisted on managing our finances, claiming it was easier if everything was centralized. But I saw now that centralized had really meant controlled, and I refused to be controlled any longer. I started scanning and backing up all my personal documents, my birth certificate, my father's inheritance paperwork, every piece of identity he might try to use against me, and stored them in a locked folder on a cloud service he didn't know about. Little by little, I reclaimed pieces of myself he had quietly taken. I also began studying his habits, noting when he left, when he returned, how long his so-called work meetings lasted, because patterns reveal weaknesses. And his pattern showed me he was most vulnerable on Tuesdays when he always claimed to work late, but in reality met Sarah. I tested it once by calling his office line at 7 in the evening and getting voicemail, then checked his phone location with a tracking app I had secretly installed after syncing his phone to my laptop. And there it was, not at work but at Sarah's neighborhood. The lie confirmed again. Each discovery that once would have shattered me now steeled me, transforming heartbreak into fuel, betrayal into a map of how to dismantle the life he thought he controlled. Leah suggested a dramatic confrontation, storming into the hotel or showing up at Sarah's door, but that wasn't my style. I didn't just want him embarrassed, I wanted him accountable. I wanted him to realize in front of witnesses, with evidence he couldn't deny, that his empire of deceit had collapsed. And so I planned my confrontation like a strategy meeting, carefully and with precision. First, I scheduled a quiet dinner with his parents, something he hated doing, which made it the perfect cover. I told them I wanted to thank them for their years of support, and they agreed eagerly, unaware of what was coming. Then I invited Leah under the pretense of celebrating my anniversary early, and finally I arranged for him to meet me there on that same evening, telling him I had a surprise. He loved surprises if they were about him, and I knew his ego would guarantee his attendance. But before the confrontation, I wanted every piece of evidence ironclad. So I went to Patricia, a lawyer recommended by Leah, who listened to my story with sharp eyes and a calm nod. She explained that with the financial records, the text messages, and my documentation, I had a case not just for divorce but for restitution. He had committed marital waste by draining joint assets for an affair, and the law would not look kindly on that. For the first time in weeks, I felt not just anger, but hope. The idea that this betrayal could end with me standing taller rather than smaller, that I could come out stronger rather than broken. So we prepared legal papers quietly, a divorce filing that would be ready to serve the very night I confronted him. The day of the confrontation arrived heavy with anticipation. I dressed carefully, not in the clothes of a victim, but in the sharp navy suit I had once reserved for important presentations. I wanted him to see strength when he looked at me, not desperation, not sorrow, but power. Leah sat beside me at the restaurant, squeezing my hand under the table, and his parents chatted cheerfully, unaware of the storm about to break. Then he walked in, smiling, confident, carrying flowers as if this were some romantic surprise. And for a brief moment I saw the man I had once fallen for. Charming, handsome, magnetic. But the illusion shattered as I remembered the messages. The hotel, the drained account, and I steadied myself, ready for what came next. We waited until he sat, ordered, until the small talk began. And then I reached into my bag and placed the binder of evidence on the table. Sliding it across to him, he looked confused, then annoyed, flipping through pages of bank records, hotel receipts, screenshots of messages. His face drained of color as his parents leaned forward, reading over his shoulder. The silence stretched heavy until finally his mother whispered, "What is this?" And I answered calmly, "This is the life your son has been living while I was sacrificing for our future," he stammered. Tried to deny, but every page contradicted him. Every receipt shouted the truth. Every message with Sarah exposed his betrayal. His parents looked at him in horror. Leah filmed discreetly from her phone, capturing every word, every expression as his mask crumbled. He tried to turn it on me, accusing me of spying, of invading his privacy, but I stayed calm, reminding him that bank accounts and shared savings were not private when they were meant for both of us, that trust is not privacy when it is broken, that loyalty is not servitude when it is betrayed. His father slammed a hand on the table, furious, demanding to know if it was true, and he faltered, unable to speak, the weight of evidence silencing the lies he had lived in so easily. And then, with steady hands, I placed the divorce papers in front of him, already signed on my end, ready to be filed. His eyes widened. His voice rose in panic, switching from denial to begging in seconds, promising it meant nothing, that Sarah was just a phase, that he loved me, that we could rebuild. But the calm in my chest surprised even me as I replied, "You didn't just cheat on me, you stole from me. You took 10 years of my sacrifices and handed them to someone else. You don't get forgiveness for that. You get consequences." His mother wept quietly. His father sat in grim silence. Leah squeezed my hand again, and I felt something rising inside me. Not anger this time, but freedom. The weight of 10 years lifting as I realized the confrontation wasn't about him anymore. It was about me finally standing in my own truth, refusing to be silenced, refusing to be predictable, refusing to give one more piece of myself to someone who had proven unworthy. The restaurant felt like a courtroom after the moment I slid the divorce papers across the table. The plates of food sat untouched, the chatter of other diners faded into the background, and all that remained was the raw exposure of truth hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. My husband's face went through a dozen shades in seconds: shock, denial, anger, panic, and finally desperation. His parents sat stunned, his mother with her hand over her mouth, his father rigid as if carved from stone, and Leah quietly recorded the moment for my protection. A silent witness to make sure the story could never be twisted. He grabbed the papers, flipping through them as if the words would rearrange themselves into something less damning. And then he looked at me with wide eyes. "You can't do this, Jade, please. You can't just throw everything away like this," he begged. His voice trembling, but I stayed steady, my tone calm. "I'm not throwing anything away. You did when you gave our savings to your mistress." The word mistress made him flinch. But I pressed on. 10 years I sacrificed. 10 years I believed in us. And you gave it away for hotel rooms and champagne with her. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it back sharply. His parents watched every movement, his father finally speaking, his voice low but filled with controlled fury. "Is it true, son? Did you really take everything you and Jade built and give it to another woman?" My husband sputtered, trying to form excuses, muttering about stress and mistakes, about being misunderstood. But his father slammed the table so hard the silverware rattled. "Answer me!" The weight of silence pressed on him until finally he broke, his voice cracking. "Yes, but it's not what you think. I was going to replace it. I just needed time. I love Sarah, but I love Jade too. I didn't want to lose either. And that confession, uttered so carelessly, so selfishly, told me everything I needed to know. It had never been about love. It had always been about control, about wanting everything without sacrifice. While I gave up everything for him, he had given up nothing for me." His mother began to cry, whispering how she couldn't believe her son could be so cruel. Leah leaned closer and whispered in my ear, "He just dug his own grave." And she was right, because in that moment it wasn't me who looked guilty or bitter. It was him, exposed, pathetic, small, the man who thought he was untouchable, now trapped by his own words. I gathered the binder, the papers, and stood up. My chair scraping against the floor, the sound sharp and final. "I won't waste another year on this," I said firmly. "This marriage is over. And tomorrow the world will know it." He tried to stand too, to block me, but Leah was quicker, stepping between us with her phone still recording. Daring him with her glare to make a scene, and he froze, knowing any aggression would only add to his downfall. I walked out of that restaurant into the cool night air with my head high, my heart pounding but steady. For the first time in 10 years, I felt free. The next morning, Patricia filed the papers. The process officially begun, and when I returned to the apartment, his belongings were scattered, a suitcase by the door. He had tried to pack quickly, maybe hoping to guilt me into taking him back. But instead of pleading, I found him sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. When he saw me, he jumped up, his voice raw. "Jade, please!" "I can't lose you. Sarah doesn't mean anything. I'll cut her off, I'll fix this, just don't do this." "Don't ruin our lives," I laughed. A sound I hadn't expected from myself, bitter and sharp. "Ruin our lives?" "You already did. You ruined everything the moment you betrayed me. The moment you treated me like nothing more than your safety net while you chased after someone else. I'm not your backup plan. I'm not your mother. And I'm not your fool anymore." His face twisted from pleading to anger, his true nature surfacing. "You think you'll be fine without me? You think you can survive out there on your own, but you can't. You need me. You'll always need me." And that was when I knew I had already won, because those words meant to scare me only proved how weak he was, how dependent on my sacrifices he had always been. I smiled, a cold, calm smile. "Watch me," and walked into the bedroom to grab the last of my things. Over the next few weeks, the fallout spread like wildfire. His parents called me often, apologizing for raising a man who could hurt me so deeply. They offered support, even a place to stay until I found my footing, though I politely declined, preferring to rebuild on my own terms. His sister reached out too, confessing she had suspected something for a long time, that she had seen him with Sarah once, but convinced herself it wasn't what it looked like. Guilt in her voice as she admitted she wished she had told me sooner. But I didn't blame her. I knew how easy it was to lie to yourself when the truth was too painful. My husband, or soon-to-be ex, spiraled. He showed up at my work once, red-eyed, shouting in the parking lot until security escorted him out. He texted constantly, switching from apologies to threats in the span of hours. But I never responded. I had blocked him everywhere, saved the messages as more evidence, and each attempt only pushed him further into a corner, his perfect mask slipping in front of everyone who once admired him. Sarah disappeared quickly. Whether she left him or he scared her off, I never knew. But it didn't matter, because by then the legal process had begun. And Patricia assured me his actions would carry weight in court. He couldn't hide what he had done. He couldn't erase the paper trail. And for once, he would face consequences instead of escaping them. For me, the days were not easy. The grief came in waves, sometimes sharp and sudden, sometimes slow and heavy, the memories of the man I thought I loved haunting me. The laughter we once shared now sounding like echoes of lies. But alongside the grief came something else, a steady current of strength. Each morning I woke and reminded myself that I had survived the worst, that the life I thought had been stolen was still mine to reclaim. And slowly, carefully, I began to imagine a future that was only mine, not tied to his broken promises or his betrayal, but built from my own choices, my own worth. The months that followed moved both faster and slower than I could have imagined. Fast because each day seemed filled with new tasks, new documents to sign, new meetings with Patricia, new calls from the court. Slow because every night I lay awake replaying a decade of my life. Every sacrifice, every moment I had chosen his needs over mine. And I asked myself why I had allowed it for so long. The divorce hearings became less about him and more about me reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Patricia was fierce, laying out the evidence of marital waste with precision. Bank statements highlighted, receipts matched with hotel dates, messages where he promised my savings to Sarah as if they were his to give away. And though he tried to fight, tried to argue that I had misunderstood, that I was overreacting, the judge's expression grew harder each time he spoke. The weight of proof undeniable. The court sided with me, awarding me restitution from the assets he had left, dividing what little remained heavily in my favor. And when the gavel came down, I felt a surge of relief so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. Not because I won against him, but because I had finally chosen myself. He glared at me as we left the courtroom, muttering under his breath that I would regret this, that no one would ever want me, but I barely heard him, his words bouncing off me like stones against steel. I had been forged in the fire of his betrayal, and I was stronger than his bitterness, stronger than his cruelty, stronger than the fear he once used to keep me small. Life didn't transform overnight. The apartment felt empty without his presence. The bed too large, the silence too heavy. But slowly, that emptiness began to feel like freedom. Space to breathe, space to rebuild. I took on more freelance work, projects I had once declined because he complained they took too much of my time. And with each client, I regained confidence in my talent, in my ability to stand on my own. I rented a small but bright apartment with money from the settlement, furnished it simply but warmly. And when I placed my grandmother's quilt on the couch and my father's photo on the shelf, I realized it finally felt like home, not a place I shared with someone who diminished me, but a place that reflected only me. His family kept their distance, though his mother called once, crying, apologizing again, begging me to understand. But I told her gently that forgiveness was not mine to give for his actions, that what he had done had cost me too much to ever be excused. She wept, saying she wished she had seen sooner what he was doing, and I told her not to blame herself because I too had chosen not to see. Not until the truth left me no choice. We hung up with a strange kind of peace, a mutual acknowledgement of wounds that would never fully heal. Leah remained my rock, reminding me on the hardest days that freedom was never easy, that healing takes time. And one night as we sat on my new balcony drinking tea, she said something that stayed with me. He thought he broke you, but all he did was reveal you. And in that moment, I believed her, because I no longer recognized the woman who had begged for scraps of attention, who had twisted herself into knots to make someone else happy. Now I saw a woman who had stood in the middle of betrayal and chosen herself, who had faced lies with truth and walked away not shattered but sharpened. Months later, I ran into Sarah unexpectedly at a cafe. She looked tired, older, her makeup unable to mask the exhaustion in her eyes. She glanced at me with recognition, shame flickering across her face. And though a part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her of what she took, I simply nodded and walked past. Because the truth was, she hadn't taken anything that wasn't freely given. He had given her my years, my savings, my trust, but he couldn't give her my resilience. My spirit or my future, those belonged only to me. And in that realization, I felt no anger, only pity. Because she was now trapped in the cycle I had broken free from. A cycle of empty promises and selfishness. A cycle I would never step into again. As the first anniversary of my divorce approached, I decided to celebrate, not mourn. I booked a trip for myself, something I had always dreamed of, but never done because he said it was impractical, a waste of money. I flew to Italy, wandered cobblestone streets, ate pasta in tiny cafes, sketched in my notebook by the river, and one evening as I stood on a balcony overlooking Florence, the sunset painting the sky in gold, I felt a swell of gratitude, not for the betrayal, but for the strength it had forced me to find, for the courage it demanded, for the woman it revealed in me. And I whispered aloud into the warm air, I am free and I am enough. Returning home, I placed a framed photo from that trip on my shelf beside my father's picture, a symbol of my new beginning, a reminder that after 10 years of sacrifice for someone else, I was finally living for myself. I no longer feared loneliness, because I had discovered the most important companionship of all, the one with my own heart, my own worth, my own truth. Sometimes late at night when I think back on everything, I don't feel anger anymore, I feel clarity. Because the best revenge is not revenge at all. It's rebuilding your life so fully that the person who tried to break you becomes irrelevant. And as I sip my tea in the quiet of my home, I smile, knowing I am not the woman who gave everything and received nothing. I am the woman who rose from betrayal and built a future brighter than he could ever imagine. a future that belongs only to me.